Alright, I didn't really give myself a whole lot of time for a proper introduction here, so I'm just going to have to give the introduction while past me takes a little minecart ride. So today I wanted to do something a little different. I know normally I do computational redstone related stuff, but I've been trying to allow myself to follow my enjoyment from time to time, and recently I'd been on a bit of a railroad craze. I'm sure most people appreciate railroads for their looks, but to me I rather enjoy the utility of it more than anything else. And that utility I thought might be able to solve some problems I've been having in my single-player world. So, today we're going to be taking a little tour of the rail network I've been putting together over the last few months here. Now, we're starting at my base, and I know I'm passing a lot of cool stuff here, but we'll get to everything in due time. For now, we're just going to be heading over to the first destination I have on the itinerary, which is the villager breeder. Now, this video is mainly going to be about the rail network, but in order to fill in the time, there are a few loosely related topics I want to bring up, just fun or interesting things that I want to share. I'll pop in from time to time to add some additional information, but for the most part, this video will mostly be a sort of sit back and enjoy the ride type video. Hopefully post-production me picks some good music to go with the scenery. Alright, so while we're traveling down the rails here, you probably have a few questions. Why did I build a rail network in my world? Why is everything so far apart? Why not just get around using nether portals? And why is the rail network decentralized the way it is? I think in order to answer these questions, I have to explain why I created this world to begin with. It's a bit of a lengthy story, but one I think you'll find useful if you're the kind of person who would love to make crazy huge builds in your world, but struggle to stick with a world long enough to do so. Okay, so what I just passed there is an alert system I designed for this rail network, and it's there to alert me of the upcoming junction here. This junction does sneak up on you, and I've missed flipping the direction before, so the alert just gives me something of a heads up. That alert is also designed to only be activated in one direction, so when we pass over it again in the other direction later on, you'll hear it doesn't go off. So back to the story of this world. Some of you might already know this, but for those of you who don't, it was actually gorillas that got me into Minecraft. See, Minecraft started becoming popular around the time Gorillaz released its album, The Plastic Beach. I was absolutely fascinated by the idea of a Tracy Island-style mansion floating on a giant mass of garbage in the middle of the ocean, and I wanted to create a model of my own that I could explore. I could have just as easily gotten into 3D modeling and made my recreation that way, but when my friends introduced me to this newfangled fad called Minecraft, I knew instantly it was the perfect medium in which to build the plastic beach. I eventually did create a model I was happy with and creative, but ever since that day I had always wanted to recreate it in survival. I think the challenge of putting something like this together in survival, where I was solely responsible for gathering every single block, would not only be rewarding, but it would also make having something like this in my world that much more special. Now, I had made many attempts to build the plastic beach in survival before, but the problem I kept encountering was I could never stick with a world long enough to get to the point where I could even consider making something like that. As I created and abandoned more worlds, I began to notice a pattern in my own behavior. First, any time I started a world, it was always with one goal in mind, to build something grand, either visually or technically. And everything I did in that world was for the sole purpose of progressing towards that goal. This left no room for any other projects, in particular projects that could have actually been fun, so very quickly playing in my world became another chore. I'm going to put this story on hold for just a brief moment here. We're coming up on our first destination. And after about a roughly 1,000 block journey, we've arrived at the villager breeder. I believe this farm is designed by LogicalGeekBoy, I'll leave a link down below, but I'm not too sure that he is the original designer of this farm. This is because there are many similar designs out there. Regardless, I built this because I needed a quick and easy villager breeder. It's not particularly fast, nor is it aesthetically pleasing, but it serves its purpose well. Now, there used to be a reservoir of villagers in the nether, technically it's still there, but that has since been abandoned and is in the process of being decommissioned. Right, that's the villager breeder. Let's head over to the trading hall next. Okay, so what I did there may seem cruel, but there's a good reason for that. Generally speaking, mobs don't wander onto tracks, but they can get pretty close. And if they get too close, they can collide with the minecart and bring it to a sudden stop. I've been stopped before, so anytime I see a mob that's too close to the tracks, I'll usually just get rid of it. Getting back on subject, this whole only work on one project and nothing else approach was something I initially thought was a good idea, because I believed I was wired to only work on one project at a time. But as time advanced, I realized that actually I didn't know how to mentally put down and pick up projects. The reason why I would only ever work on one project at a time is because it allowed me to keep that project in my cognitive focus. Never mind the fact that I was forcing myself to work on projects that were, at that point, boring. I had to keep working on it because it was the only thing that was still in my head. And if I worked on something else, there was no guarantee I could come back. I found documentation and journaling helped with this, but soon after doing that, I discovered that, no, actually, in fact, I am wired to work on multiple things simultaneously. And here we are at the trading hall, built out here due to its close proximity to the villager breeder. You might notice it doesn't look particularly finished, and that's because about partway through making it I decided trading hall wasn't what I wanted to make, and decided to abandon it. I kept the villagers around though because they do have some good enchantments available, but eventually they'll be moved to Spawn Town, something we will be looking at later on in this tour. If I haven't mentioned it already, the location of these projects were for the most part accidental, as they were picked by wherever the nether portal I was coming out of happened to generate. The villager trading hall is located here because I had a villager transportation system in the nether that led here. I thought it was a good idea initially, but decided against it when I realized that transporting villagers through the nether isn't as headache-free as I initially thought it would be. This is a topic I've either already explained or will be explaining later on, depending on how I decide to splice this audio together. That's enough of that then, let's head over to the mob farm now. Going back to discussing how I'm wired here, this honestly was an odd discovery for me. I initially thought this was a flaw, but it turns out my style of working on projects involves having about a half dozen projects open at any given time, and then just hopping between them. There's no rhyme or reason as to which projects I work on at any given time. If I grow tired of one project, I stop working on it, and if I get excited to work on another project, I start working on that. Maybe this sort of thing could be considered too impulsive, but it kept me interested in my projects, and that made me happy. Alright, we've passed over a couple of these things now, so I think it's high time I explained what exactly these things are. This is a semi-automatic junction. Now, semi-automatic junctions are not new, but most designs I've found either stop the minecart, which is not something I want to do, or their activation system is pretty bulky, which is not ideal to me. So instead, I decided to design my own, using the fact that path blocks don't cut off redstone signals as my activation system. I went with that because it's the simplest and most compact, but I also found it's the most reliable. Very rarely do I miss a junction because of this system. I should also mention that these junctions are not permanent. Eventually, I plan on replacing them with fully automatic junctions, but that system is still in development, so these are filling the role in the meantime. Okay, so the second reason why I think I could never stick with any world long enough to work on large projects is because I noticed I always had to have a master plan. See, in my mind, working towards these mega projects would always require a mega farm to supply them with materials. This meant that I needed to list out every farm that I needed. I needed to find or develop the biggest and best version of these farms, and they needed to be laid out in a manner that made supplying everything easy. I was drawing up the perfect plans for the late game before the wheat in my starter farm had fully grown. What inevitably happened as a result of this was some oversight would require me to improvise, and I would find myself endlessly debating with myself over the location of something as simple as a microfarm. Analysis paralysis, that's what they call it in more technical fields, but for some odd reason, it never occurred to me that nothing in this world is permanent, and that things can be moved if I so choose. Nor did it occur to me that if things couldn't be moved, I could redesign my farms to fit the space constraints, which requires much less planning and forethought. Now arriving at Mob Farm Southwest. I don't know why I decided to add the Southwest bit. At this point, I really only have one mob farm. Anyway, this is one of my first major builds in this world, hence why it's made almost entirely out of cobblestone. It's a pretty simple design, based on a Flushing-style mob farm designed by Redstone Jazz. I just built it 4 times, added my own custom collection system, some redstone for synchronizing everything, and built it above an ocean, and placed an AFK spot well above the water's surface. It's just a lot easier than lighting up caves. Now, the collection system is built with magma blocks to kill any mobs that don't die from fall damage, but it also has its own flushing system that's synchronized with the flushing cycle of each farm. You might also be wondering why I built the same farm 4 times, and that's because, if you think about it, the operation of a flushing-style farm can be split into 4 phases, that being spawning, filling, flushing, and draining. By having 4 farms, I can have one farm occupy each of these phases, and then just periodically cycle them, guaranteeing mobs are always spawning at any given time. Now, I achieve this phase control with a 2-bit binary counter, which feeds into a decoder and then an encoder. The filling and draining phases technically are just the transition points between spawning and flushing, which is just an on-off cycle. So all this encoder does is just turn on 2 of the farms. Now, which 2 farms it turns on varies depending on the state of the 2-bit binary counter, but yeah, those are details. Now, does this system make the mob farm more efficient? I have absolutely no idea, but I built it anyway. I still like how you can see some of the larger buildings, even from faraway places, and that's thanks to the Distant Horizons mod. I really like this mod, and I think LODs are something that should be added to the base game, as this is, I believe, what Minecraft should look like by default. Cool, so let's go visit Spawn Town now. So, having figured out what was keeping me from sticking with the world long enough to build the plastic beach, that being focusing on a final goal too much and planning in too great of detail, when I created this world back in September of 2019, I did so with 3 things in mind. 1. I would have a goal, but I would hold myself to no expectations. Things would happen when they happen. 2, I went in with no plan, playing on a completely random seed and promising to solve problems only as they come up, with no concern for how they might affect things in the future. And 3, I would not focus on just one project. I would give myself a mix of practical and passion projects to keep myself entertained, and would only work on something if I had the desire to do so, which harks back to the whole no expectations for myself thing. The result of this resolve 4 years later is a world that admittedly doesn't have much as far as development is concerned, but is something I still actively play in and enjoy to this day. Okay, so what does that have to do with a rail network? Well, as I said before, my resolution here was to solve immediate problems as they came up, and one of the problems I had created for myself was my world was spread too far apart. See, early in my world's progression, I wanted to spread out a bit to reduce the lag in any given area, and I knew I needed a means of getting around my world in order to do that, so I decided to start assembling a network of nether portals. Unfortunately, it didn't take me long to realize that traveling through the nether sucked. It was a pain to get the roads built in the nether, the quantity of materials I could transport was limited, even with shulker boxes and an ender chest, and transporting entities was a nightmare at best. That last issue I tried to remedy by laying down some tracks, but then I thought, why shove an entity through a portal, into a minecart, ship it off, pull it out of the minecart, and shove it through another portal, when I can just put it in a minecart once and send it directly to where it needs to go? And here we are, just outside of Spawn Town. Named so because the world spawn is somewhere in this area. Now, this is an interesting project. It initially started out as a project to secure and upgrade the village that had already existed here, but eventually the project morphed into building what I would call my ideal town. I really like human-scale walkable cities. To me, they're far more relaxing than the concrete hellscape we call modern shopping centers. But I don't like it when they're overly crowded. I hate being in big cities. I like mid-density, something lively but not overwhelming. And this project is basically an opportunity for me to solidify what exactly it is I want in a town. At the time of recording this, there isn't too terribly much. I'll show some more recent pictures of the project to give you a better idea of what it is I'm going for, though. Now, the model town is the main reason for this project, but this is also an opportunity for me to develop my skills as a builder. Making aesthetically pleasing structures is not my strong suit, as you can see, but my hopes is that as I build out this town, my building skills will improve and things will begin to look better and better as time goes on. The third reason for this project, though, is because technically this is my new trading hall. Traditional trading halls are nice and certainly convenient, but one of the things I've always felt was missing from my Minecraft worlds was a bit of life. The sense that there are other things living out their lives in this world other than myself. I could be mistaken, but I think having a bunch of villagers wandering around here might add some much-needed life to my world. Will this complicate the process of trading? Probably. But I think behaving like I'm going into town for a small shopping spree will add to the charm, so that's a trade-off I'm willing to make. Right, off we go. Next stop is the sand quarry. Now, sand quarries are nothing special, but again, this is one of those solve the immediate problem type of things first. I needed a large quantity of sand, so a sand quarry was a no-brainer. So back to how the rail network came to be. Once I realized that I could simplify the process of transporting entities with an overworld rail network, that was what I decided to build. I abandoned the nether network entirely and began laying down track and designing infrastructure. And as I did so, I began to realize a few things. One, minecart travel, as far as I'm aware, is the only mode of transport that is completely hands-off, meaning you can sit back and enjoy the scenery as you travel, which has been greatly improved upon by the Caves and Cliffs update. Two, if you can convoy minecart chests together, suddenly your capacity for material grows far beyond what any other mode of transportation offers you. And three, you can transport entities, and lots of them. This is something you are not able to do with any other mode of transportation. As we make our way to the sand quarry, I understand something like a sand quarry really isn't a noteworthy destination. But I'm showing this off mainly to demonstrate that a rail network like this really does make it much easier to set up connections to these faraway places, as well as transport the goods that are produced there, as I've discussed or will discuss in this video. That said, there's not too much here to see. It's basically just a big hole in the ground, so there's still lots more to visit, so let's move on to the end stronghold, shall we? Going back to the topic of the advantage of rail networks, since a rail network allows you to do what most modes of transportation do not, I quickly began to realize the logistical advantages this rail network offers you, both in the mid-game when you need to expand your base of operations to other parts of the world, and in the late game when you need to transport large amounts of materials around your world. That said though, you may notice that my rail network appears to be different from most other rail networks in Minecraft. It's decentralized, in contrast to what most people tend to do, which is to start with a central station and branch out from there. I didn't really like the central station model. The trouble is, if you wanted to travel from one end of your network to another, it will require you to stop at the central station, get out of one minecart, and get into another to continue your journey. This is already cumbersome. Imagine doing this with a convoy of 20 villagers or 40 minecart chests. For this reason, it was super important to me that I be able to travel from any point on the network to any other point and never have to stop once. Now we're going to be passing by my base again, but I'm not going to be stopping there. There's nothing too fancy about it, it's just some starter farms, but if you're wondering why it's so close to Spawn Town, that's mainly because when I started this world, I spawned in the village where the Spawn Town is today, and the first thing I did was get the hell out of there to prevent the villagers from dying in the night. But where I set up camp is where I decided to make my base of operations, and the rest is history. And now this monolithic tower that you're seeing to your right here is actually a project I started recently. It's basically a consolidation of all the farms needed to manufacture any redstone components, including a witch farm, slime farm, we got some honey farms up at the top there, as well as a smooth stone and cobblestone generator, as well as a few other farms that I'm yet to actually build in order to build things like pistons, repeaters, comparators, and things of that sort. Alright, we've got a good long journey ahead of us, which means I can talk about this world's history some more without worrying of being interrupted every 30 seconds. So, as I said before, being able to travel throughout my network without stopping was super important to me. And I think I've achieved this with the style of junctions I developed for this project. They allow me to travel anywhere without stopping, and they're not too bulky either. That said, this style of network does come with its own set of challenges. Unlike a centralized network, as this decentralized network grows, it will become harder and harder to navigate. If you're a fan of the minecart internet project, you might like this, because I think fully automating the network is the solution to this problem, making this project something of the successor to the minecart internet project. The process of routing a minecart convoy is super simplified in comparison to routing internet packets, but it still requires some of the basic mechanisms provided by internet infrastructure to do this. By the way, I mentioned before that this automatic routing system is currently in development. It's not finished at this point in time, but I have been documenting my progress for a few months now, and if you'd like to see what I have developed so far, check out my Patreon. I would greatly appreciate the support, and for as little as $1 a month, or just $12 a year, you get access to smaller project updates posted nearly every week. Okay, I honestly thought talking about this rail network and its development would take longer, but that's about everything. I think it elegantly solves the problem I mentioned prior, acting as a tool for aiding in the expansion of my world now, and running supplies and materials around my world later. And with any luck, when the day comes when I finally get to build my plastic beach, I think this rail network is going to have an opportunity to really shine. That's all I got for now. I'll give you a break from my voice for a bit, and then I'll come back with another topic or two. Okay, so here's another interesting topic I want to bring up, and that is exactly how am I supposed to deal with incomplete projects? See, my decision to work on what interests me with no expectations or requirements to complete anything within a certain time frame, it sounds nice on paper, but there is one potential issue, and that is it makes it far too easy to not finish anything. Obviously, if I'm just constantly jumping to whatever project catches my fancy, there's a good chance that some, or possibly even all of my projects might never catch my fancy again, and be left behind forever unfinished. If you had pointed out this to me a few years ago, I would completely agree that this is a huge problem and must be remedied through discipline, which is why I only ever worked on one project at a time. I may have been forcing myself to work on something that brings me no satisfaction or entertainment, but at least things were being completed, right? Well, no, not exactly. I find I can only force myself to work on something for so long before I just can't work on anything anymore. This ties back to my What Happened video, the one I posted after my hiatus. In addition to what I said in that video, I think part of the problem I was having was I was just tired of forcing myself to work on things I had no emotional interest in. So does that mean I'm okay with things never being completed? That answer is complicated. I like it when things are completed, but I'm finding that if the state of being complete is perpetually out there in the future, then eventually I'm going to get discouraged. So instead, what I've been doing as of late is just changing my definition of what it means to be complete. This is an interesting idea, and it's one that I've mainly borrowed from the agile/continuous delivery crowd, and that is the distinction between complete and ready to ship. See, when programming with agile or continuous delivery, your development cycle is short. 2 weeks is usually what I see, and in that 2-week time frame, you work on just one feature. You write your tests, write your code, test and refactor, make small adjustments until everything is working as you'd expect, and at this point, the feature, and by extension the program, is complete. Everything works as intended. Now, is it ready to ship? The answer to that may be no. You may be missing some features that you've deemed are required for the program to be ready to ship, but the features you do have are working, and as a result of that, the project is technically complete. Implementing this in my own world then, that means that everything in my world is perpetually complete and not complete. Everything I want to do is done, but everything is still in development. It's a really weird state of being, really, but I'm finding that this sort of approach is exactly what I need. Right, so here we are at the end stronghold. If you're curious, I did in fact defeat the Ender Dragon already. If this was an earlier version of the game, I'd say that might be noteworthy, but it seems like the Ender Dragon fight has gotten easier in later versions, hence the glossing over at this point. I'd show you the end as well, but at the time of recording this, I hadn't done anything in the end apart from defeating the Ender Dragon, so since we all know what the end and stronghold looks like, I'd say let's visit the terracotta quarry now. Going back to the subject of things being in a perpetual state of complete and in development, this sounds pretty odd, but if you'd like to see what this sort of mindset looks like after being applied for over 10 years, check out Ethos Labs on YouTube. He embodies this idea that I'm talking about very well. He only works on what he finds interesting at that time and is notorious for abandoning projects. But his world is lacking anything but progress. His patchwork style of carving out his world has resulted in what can only be described as probably the most intricate and functional world ever created. It's really inspiring to see this in progress, and even more so to find out that it works quite well for me. Alright, so this is awkward. It appears Razer has decided to push a software update in the middle of me actually recording the voiceover for this video. So, if you notice a change in the audio quality, it's not a new mic, it's new mic software. Anyway, here's another talking point I want to bring up here. It's something of an observation I've made, and that is, recently I've noticed that there seems to be a very large parallel between Minecraft and real life. I mean, obviously, yes, Minecraft is a sandbox game, and one could argue that real life is something of a sandbox too, but I think the similarities go further than that. In both cases, technically, there are no rules, no restrictions as to what you can do, and ultimately, you're the driving force for anything one could consider to be interesting. The implication of this idea, then, is what makes the game worth playing isn't the gameplay loop, or the lore, or anything like that. It's what you decide to do in it. The game is only as fun as you make it. And not too far from me on Stronghold here is my terracotta quarry. Now, this line is a relatively new addition in my world, which is why hardly any terracotta is missing here. There's more dug up now, but at the time of recording this, I had only collected a few stacks of the stuff. Even still, similar to the sand quarry, the rail network makes setting this up pretty convenient, even though I had to travel so far to get this stuff. But it also makes it easy to move the quarry when this spot eventually dries up. We've got one more leg on our journey, and it's the longest one yet, and that's the track that leads to the Nether Fortress farm. Given how far we've got and how much time is left in the day, we're more than likely going to need to stop to sleep through the night here, but we'll press on anyway. So, in a sandbox game where there are no rules, no story, and no gameplay loop, it should be obvious that you are the driving force for anything worth doing. The game is only as fun as you make it, so then why does the game sometimes feel like it's not very fun? How might you make the game fun? How might you make the game worth playing? I get the feeling that there are far too many people struggling to answer this question in real life, and I'm beginning to believe that if you can find the answer to this question in Minecraft, the same answer can be applied to the real world as well. For me then, building things, particularly big, fun, and interesting things, makes the game fun. And just like in the real world, these big, fun, and interesting things require a substantial amount of work to be made into a reality. Some might call this phase the grind, so the question I've been struggling with is how do you make that work enjoyable? How do you find the fun in the grind? If what I've found is indeed correct, then I think maybe I've found the answer. Maybe the best thing for me to do is to not focus too intensely on one specific thing, but instead let myself get carried away from time to time and follow whatever catches my fancy. Maybe. I don't know for certain, but I will say this, thanks to Minecraft, I don't have to wait my whole life to find out if I'm right or wrong. The feedback loop has been drastically shortened, and I think that in and of itself is worth its weight in gold. I'm sure you've noticed by now that my rail network seems to use a lot of diagonals instead of sharp turns. Or maybe you've noticed that the track seems to move with the land instead of cutting through it. And that design decision was completely intentional. When I started laying down this track, I thought it would be fun to do so as if I was a real railroad company. Making my turns less aggressive and opting to take the cheapest path rather than the most direct path. This means bridging and tunneling only where it's absolutely necessary. Ironically, it is a lot of extra work, but I think moving with the land makes the journey a little bit more interesting. Alright, I think I can squeeze a few more talking points into this video here. So, one other thing I want to bring up is the topic of Let's Plays. I mentioned back in my Patreon launch video that I would possibly consider doing a Let's Play, provided that I did so from the stance of playing games for my own enjoyment first, rather than playing games for the sake of creating content. I still feel that way, but as I had mentioned before, I've done Let's Plays before, quite a number of them actually, and I can't help but feel that even if I started playing games for the sake of my own enjoyment first, the way Let's Plays are put together, it might easily devolve into playing games for the sake of making content anyway. I'm not sure if what I'm saying is making sense, but to me, Let's Plays are usually recorded while the game is being played, so a part of your brain is used for playing the game, while another is used to form the narrative, and it's all too easy for the narrative to start affecting your gameplay. If I were to do a Let's Play then, I think what I'd want to do is something more of a retrospective style of video, where the process of making a video comes after playing the game. If I were to do something like this then, more than likely the video wouldn't end up being a mix of topics like most Let's Plays are, but rather they'd be about a single topic, being some project and how things developed. Something like the video you're watching right now. I think this would be more sustainable for me, since it creates a clear separation between the process of playing the game and the process of creating the narrative. But it should also still be enjoyable for you, because you still get that narrative story that everyone tells in their Let's Plays of how they created cool contraptions to solve intricate problems. The only time I would see this sort of video format not working is in the early game, since I don't think you would have enough interesting things happening early on to produce videos about. So, the best time to start this sort of series would have to be somewhere in the mid-game, which, hey, look at that, I just so happen to have a world already in that phase. So that's just my thoughts on the subject, but what do you guys think? If I were to start releasing Let's Play videos in this style, would that be something you'd find interesting? Let me know in the comments. Okay, this part is interesting. You can see the line of trees there where it transitions from grass plains to a large spruce forest. That's actually where the caves and cliffs terrain begins. It's a very stark transition, and when I loaded these chunks, I was expecting to see more mountainous terrains, but as you can see, the snow-capped mountain there is about all I have at this time. I can't say I'm not disappointed, but this is my world, so despite the lack of cool mountains, I'm sticking with it. It just means I'll either have to regenerate old terrain or travel further out into the world to find something cooler. That said, though, I had thought that this mountain would be a nice spot for a castle or a fortress of some kind. Maybe that'll be a future project. Yeah, it's getting too dark for my liking. Time to rest. Now, if we look to the left here, you can actually see the terracotta quarry off in the distance. And when adding that rail branch, I initially considered approaching that location from this direction, but that would require building a massive bridge over open water, and I thought that would look dumb, so I decided to branch off the end stronghold line instead. And as we continue to the Nether Fortress portal here, we can see a massive bridge over open water. Yeah, this wasn't something I necessarily wanted to build, it was mainly just a necessity, but it is relatively short, comparatively speaking. I had considered decorating this bridge, making it into sort of like a large suspended bridge. I thought that might look cool, but at the same time I'm considering deleting the chunks on the other end of this bridge, so simply because they were generated pre-caves and cliffs, they kind of stick out like a sore thumb. So I'm putting that decision on the back burner for now. If you're curious why we're heading so far out just for a simple nether fortress, that's actually a funny story. This world was made before the nether update, so the closest nether fortress I had was maybe 600 or 700 blocks away. That's 700 blocks in the nether. Remember, my primary method of travel was initially a nether network, so when I made the decision to move my primary mode of transportation to the overworld, that meant I needed a rail line that was about 5,000 blocks long. I'm strongly considering just ripping up this line, deleting the chunks, and regenerating the nether. The resulting island that was generated here is a bit of an eyesore, but I have yet to finalize that decision. So now we're here at the Nether Fortress portal. Apart from the portal, the only other thing here is an Ilmango cobblestone farm. I use this to collect cobblestone for the Nether Fortress farm, but truth be told, it was probably a bit overkill. Regardless, it was still useful to build the spawning platforms of the Nether Fortress farm, or at least start building them. As you can see, it's not fully complete, but that's okay. I'm still able to use this farm to farm wither skulls, even if it is very, very slow. So yeah, that's my rail network. As I've hopefully made clear in this rather long video, I'm really excited to see how the system develops and what it will allow me to do as it continues to grow. And with any luck, this will hopefully bring me a step closer to realizing my own survival build Plastic Beach. And maybe a few other cool builds I have in my schematic library, but those are topics for future videos. I want to give a very special thanks to the people who chose to support me on Patreon. Your support is very encouraging, and if you'd like to support my channel, the link will be in the description. And with that, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.